The summer of 1841 pressed down on Oakmont Plantation with merciless intensity. Heat rose in visible waves from the endless cotton fields where dozens of enslaved people stooped under the Georgia sun, their backs glistening with sweat, hands raw from the constant pulling and plucking. From her shaded veranda, Eleanor Hargrove surveyed her property with the detached interest of someone examining a painting. At 32, the recent widow had inherited everything: 500 acres of prime land, the grand white-columned mansion, and 78 human beings who were considered her property under law. "More tea, Mrs. Hargrove?" Martha, a house servant of about 50, approached with downcast eyes. "No, Martha. Tell Daniel I wish to speak with him about tomorrow's shipment." Eleanor's voice carried the refined accent of Charleston society, where she had been raised to become the wife of a wealthy plantation owner. Martha nodded silently and retreated into the house. Eleanor remained motionless in her black mourning dress, contemplating the empire she now commanded alone. Bartholomew Hargrove had been 30 years her senior, a calculated match arranged by her father to secure both families' fortunes. His sudden death from apoplexy 3 months earlier had transformed her overnight from an obedient wife to one of the wealthiest widows in Savannah County. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. Daniel Walker stood at a respectful distance, hat in hand, waiting to be acknowledged. At 35, Daniel carried himself with a dignity that contradicted his status. Unlike most of the enslaved people at Oakmont, he could read and write, skills taught to him secretly by Bartholomew's first wife, who had seen potential in the young boy. After her death, Bartholomew had made Daniel overseer, trusting his intelligence and natural leadership while still keeping him enslaved. A peculiar arrangement that raised eyebrows among neighboring planters but increased productivity. "Daniel," Eleanor said, finally turning to face him, "I need the cotton shipment ready by dawn. Mr. Patterson will arrive with his wagons at 7. "Yes, ma'am. We've already sorted 60 bales. Should be finished by nightfall." Eleanor studied him momentarily. Daniel's features were composed, his brown eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts, a survival skill perfected over decades of captivity. Yet there was something in his bearing that had always fascinated her, an inner fortitude that no amount of subjugation had managed to break. "How are the new people adjusting?" she asked, referring to the 3 enslaved individuals she had purchased at auction the previous week, a desperate measure to replace hands lost to a fever outbreak in the spring. "The woman, Esther, is strong, good worker. The boy needs time," Daniel replied carefully. "The older man, Isaiah, he's having difficulties." "What sort of difficulties?" Daniel hesitated. "He tried to run last night, ma'am. Caleb and I caught him at the North Creek." Eleanor's expression hardened. "And you handled it?" "Yes, ma'am." The unspoken question hung between them. Traditionally, attempted escapes were punished severely, often publicly. Bartholomew had delighted in making examples of those who dared seek freedom. Eleanor had always found the practice distasteful, but had never voiced objection. "There will be no public punishment," she said finally. "Restrict him to the quarters for a week. Double his work quota once he returns to the fields." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. He nodded. "As you wish, Mrs. Hargrove." "I've received a letter from my brother-in-law," Eleanor continued, changing the subject abruptly. "He'll be visiting next month to discuss Bartholomew's estate matters." Daniel's face remained impassive, but Eleanor noticed his shoulders tensing slightly. James Hargrove had never approved of his brother's decision to place an enslaved man in a position of authority. His visits to Oakmont invariably resulted in harsher conditions for everyone. "I'll ensure everything is in order for his arrival," Daniel said. A sudden commotion from the direction of the cotton gin interrupted their conversation. Shouts echoed across the yard, followed by the sound of breaking wood. Without waiting for permission, Daniel sprinted toward the noise, Eleanor gathering her skirts and following at a distance. They arrived to find a terrifying scene. The ginn's wooden housing had splintered, and 12-year-old Micah lay trapped beneath the mechanism, his arm caught in the rollers. Blood seeped through his tattered shirt as he screamed in agony. Several enslaved workers stood frozen in horror, while the gin operator frantically tried to reverse the mechanism. "Get him out!" Daniel commanded, rushing forward. With surprising strength, he lifted the heavy wooden frame enough for 2 men to pull the boy free. Micah's arm was mangled beyond recognition, crushed and twisted at an impossible angle. The child's screams had transformed into shock-induced whimpers, his small body trembling violently. "Take him to the cookhouse," Eleanor ordered, her voice steady despite the gruesome sight. "Martha knows herbs. Send someone for Dr. Wilkins." As they carried the boy away, Eleanor noticed Daniel examining the broken machinery with focused intensity. "What happened?" she asked. "Housing split," he answered grimly. "Been telling the master, telling Mr. Hargrove for months it needed replacing." There was an edge to his voice he rarely allowed her to hear. Wood was rotted through. Eleanor felt a flush of shame. Bartholomew had ignored countless requests for repairs, always citing costs despite the plantation's substantial profits. She had never questioned his decisions, had never concerned herself with such matters. "Fix it," she said, "whatever you need. And the boy likely lose the arm," Daniel said bluntly. "If he survives." Their eyes met, and in that moment, some unspoken understanding passed between them. Acknowledgement of the brutal system that valued cotton production over a child's life and limb. Later that evening, after Dr. Wilkins had indeed amputated Micah's shattered arm, Eleanor sat alone in Bartholomew's study. The room remained unchanged since his death, the heavy mahogany desk positioned to intimidate anyone summoned to stand before it, shelves lined with ledgers documenting human beings as assets alongside cotton yields and equipment expenses. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Daniel entered, his shirt stained with blood from assisting with the emergency surgery. "The doctor's gone," he reported. "Says the boy might live if infection doesn't set in." Eleanor nodded, then indicated the chair across from her, an unprecedented invitation that clearly startled him. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel sat stiffly on the edge of the seat. "I've been reviewing the plantation accounts," Eleanor said, gesturing to the open ledger before her. "Bartholomew left substantial debts I was unaware of." Daniel's expression remained carefully neutral. "Cotton prices have fallen 3 seasons running. Yet he continued buying more land, more—" She paused, searching for a word other than slaves, but finding none suitable. "More people." "Yes, ma'am. You've been keeping separate accounts." It wasn't a question. Eleanor slid a small leather-bound notebook across the desk, Bartholomew's private journal, which she had discovered hidden in a compartment of the desk. Inside were furious entries about discrepancies, suspicions that Daniel was recording false numbers, accusations of theft. Daniel went very still, his eyes fixed on the notebook. "Mrs. Hargrove." "Where is it?" she interrupted. "The money he couldn't find." For a long moment Daniel said nothing, clearly calculating the risk of any answer he might give. "The truth, Daniel," Eleanor insisted. "I'm not my husband." "Under the floorboards in the old tool shed," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About $800. Eleanor showed no reaction to the substantial sum. "Money for escape." "Freedom," he corrected quietly. "For some of the children." Eleanor rose from the desk and walked to the window. Outside, darkness had fallen over Oakmont. In the distance, lights flickered in the slave quarters, tiny pockets of humanity where her property lived out whatever private moments they could claim. "My brother-in-law will try to take control of Oakmont," she said, still looking out the window. As a woman alone, the law favors his claim as Bartholomew's closest male relative, despite the will. Daniel remained silent, undoubtedly wondering why she was sharing this information with him. "I need your help, Daniel," Eleanor continued, turning to face him. "I need to understand everything about running this plantation. Every detail Bartholomew kept from me. Everything you know that he didn't." Their eyes met across the room, a wealthy white widow and an enslaved man holding countless dangerous secrets between them. In the heavy silence that followed, something shifted in the very foundation of Oakmont Plantation, like the first tremor before an earthquake. "Why would I help you?" Daniel finally asked, the question itself an unprecedented act of defiance. Eleanor returned to the desk and sat down, folding her hands deliberately before her. "Because I'm offering you a choice." In the cookhouse, young Micah's fate hung by a thread as fever set in. In the fields, Isaiah plotted another escape despite his punishment. In neighboring plantations, rumors had already begun about the widow Hargrove's unusual management decisions. And in Savannah, James Hargrove prepared for a journey to Oakmont with every intention of wresting control from his brother's widow. Change was coming to Oakmont Plantation. Subtle at first, like the whisper of wind before a storm. None could predict the devastating consequences that would follow, nor the unlikely alliance forming between mistress and overseer that would challenge the very foundations of their world. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to Oakmont. Most notable was Eleanor's increasing presence beyond the confines of the main house. Where she had previously ventured only as far as the garden, she now appeared regularly in the stables, the cotton gin, and even the processing sheds. The enslaved workers watched with wary confusion as she inspected operations, asked questions, and occasionally contradicted established procedures, always after private consultations with Daniel. "She's sizing us up for sale," predicted Luella, who had served as Bartholomew's cook for 20 years. "White lady suddenly interested in how many bushels we can pick means she's calculating our worth." "I don't think so," countered Martha, lowering her voice as they prepared the evening meal. Something different in her eyes now, like she's really seeing for the first time. "Seeing what?" "Us as people. Don't fool yourself," Luella scoffed, aggressively kneading dough with practiced hands. "Masters change, chains remain." Outside in the gathering dusk, Eleanor walked the path between the main house and the slave quarters, Daniel accompanying her at a respectful distance. They had fallen into a routine of evening inspections, ostensibly to check on repairs and preparations, but increasingly to provide cover for their conversations away from the household staff and the occasional visiting neighbor. "The cotton's coming in heavier than expected in the North Field," Daniel reported. "Could mean an extra 20 bales if the weather holds." Eleanor nodded. "And the repairs to the gin?" "Completed yesterday, stronger than before." They passed the small infirmary where Micah was recovering. The boy had survived against Dr. Wilkins' expectations, though the loss of his arm meant his value as a field worker was drastically diminished. In the old system, Bartholomew's system, he would have been sold cheaply or relegated to the most menial tasks. Eleanor had instead instructed that he be taught to read and assist with inventory once recovered. "James will arrive in 2 weeks," Eleanor said as they reached the edge of the quarters. Several children playing in the dirt scattered at her approach, disappearing into cabins. "His letter suggests he's bringing a potential buyer for some of the land." Daniel's expression darkened. "Divide the plantation?" "Divide and conquer," Eleanor confirmed. "He'll start with the land, then suggest selling some of the people to manage the debt, then offer to help by taking over completely." "And your plan?" Eleanor glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "The debts are real, but not insurmountable if we have a good harvest. I've written to Mr. Sutcliffe at the bank in Savannah. He's agreed to extend our credit until January." Daniel looked impressed, despite himself. Gordon Sutcliffe was known for his conservative lending practices. "How did you manage that?" A ghost of a smile crossed Eleanor's face. "It seems Mr. Sutcliffe had some financial indiscretions in his past that Bartholomew kept record of. I suggested that continued discretion would be mutually beneficial." Daniel stared at her with new appreciation. "You blackmailed him." "I negotiated," Eleanor corrected primly, though the slight upturn of her mouth betrayed her satisfaction. But we still need to reduce expenses immediately while increasing productivity. I'll need your complete inventory by tomorrow. Already prepared, Daniel said, and I've reassigned tasks based on ability rather than tradition. Some of the women are faster at sorting than the men assigned before. The older children can manage the water distribution more efficiently. Eleanor nodded approval. What of Isaiah? Watching, Daniel replied tersely. He's planning something. Spoke to the new field hand, Thomas, about the northern routes yesterday. The Underground Railroad. Daniel hesitated before answering. This topic ventured into dangerous territory. Knowledge he shouldn't possess, contacts he shouldn't have, information that could get him killed if revealed to most plantation owners. Yes, he finally confirmed. There are pathways, people who help. Eleanor absorbed this without visible reaction. How many have tried from Oakmont? 7 under Bartholomew. 3 made it. Daniel's voice held carefully controlled emotion. He tracked the others with dogs, made examples of them. The unspoken question hung between them. What would she do when the next escape was attempted? The test would inevitably come. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Caleb, one of the few enslaved men trusted to serve as an auxiliary overseer. His face was troubled as he hurried toward them. "Mr. Daniel, Mrs. Hargrove," he said, bowing slightly. "Riders coming. 4 men." Eleanor and Daniel exchanged concerned glances. Visitors at this hour were unusual, and multiple riders suggested official business. Rarely good news for any plantation. "Return to the house," Daniel advised. "I'll meet them at the main road." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "We'll both receive them. Caleb, tell Martha to prepare refreshments." The riders appeared minutes later, dust-covered from the road and grim-faced. Eleanor recognized Sheriff Talbot leading the group, with 2 of his deputies and Mr. Collins, who owned the neighboring plantation. "Mrs. Hargrove," the sheriff greeted her with a tip of his hat, though his eyes narrowed at the sight of Daniel standing unnervingly close to her. "Apologize for the late call." "What brings you to Oakmont, Sheriff?" Eleanor asked, maintaining the composed demeanor expected of a plantation mistress. "Runaways," Collins interjected before the sheriff could respond. 3 of my people fled last night, heading this direction, according to the dogs." "That's unfortunate, Mr. Collins," Eleanor replied. "How can we assist you?" "I need to search your quarters and outbuildings," Sheriff Talbot stated matter-of-factly. "Standard procedure, ma'am. Sometimes these runaways find help where they shouldn't." His pointed glance toward Daniel made the implication clear. Eleanor felt tension radiating from Daniel beside her, though his face remained impassive. "Of course, Sheriff. Daniel will assist you in searching the quarters. I'm certain you'll find nothing amiss at Oakmont." "With respect, Mrs. Hargrove," Collins said, not bothering to hide his condescension, "we'll conduct the search as we see fit. Your overseer can remain with you." The emphasis on overseer carried all the disdain of the Plantation Society for Bartholomew's unconventional arrangement. Eleanor understood immediately. They suspected Daniel of aiding the escapees, and they didn't want him warning anyone before the search. "As you wish," she replied coolly. "However, I must insist you conduct your business without disturbing my household unnecessarily. We've had illness among the quarters recently." Sheriff Talbot nodded curtly and signaled his deputies to dismount. As they moved toward the slave quarters, Collins remained on his horse, studying Eleanor with undisguised suspicion. "Your husband had peculiar ideas about plantation management, Mrs. Hargrove," he remarked. "Letting slaves read, appointing one as overseer, caused talk." "My husband ran a profitable enterprise, Mr. Collins," Eleanor replied evenly. "His methods, while unconventional, produced results. I see no reason to change what works." Collins snorted. "Woman alone shouldn't have to concern herself with such matters. Your brother-in-law arriving soon, I hear?" "For a brief visit," Eleanor confirmed, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. From the quarters came shouts as the deputies began their search, forcing doors open and dragging occupants outside. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he remained silent, knowing intervention would only make matters worse. The search lasted over an hour. Children cried, women protested, and men were roughly handled as the deputies tore through the small cabins. Eleanor watched from the porch of the main house, her face a mask of aristocratic indifference that concealed her growing discomfort with the proceedings. Finally, Sheriff Talbot returned, looking frustrated. "Nothing," he reported to Collins. "If they came this way, they didn't stop here." Collins was clearly dissatisfied. "Check the fields at first light," he instructed the sheriff. "And the marsh beyond. They can't have gotten far." He turned to Eleanor with barely concealed hostility. "Good evening, Mrs. Hargrove. Give my regards to James when he arrives." After the riders departed, Eleanor found Daniel staring out toward the quarters, where people were slowly returning to their disrupted homes. "They knew," he said quietly. "Knew what?" Eleanor asked. "That the runaways wouldn't be here. This was a warning, to you and to me." Eleanor considered this. "Because of the changes we're making?" Daniel nodded grimly. "Plantation owners talk. Field hands talk. Word spreads when things change, even small things. Reducing the work hours by 1 hour before sunset is hardly revolutionary," Eleanor pointed out. "It's not any one thing," Daniel explained. "It's all of it together. You asking questions, learning the operation, treating—" He hesitated, then finished, "treating people differently." The implications hung heavily between them. Any deviation from the established order was viewed as a threat by those whose wealth and position depended on maintaining that order. Eleanor's gender already made her position precarious. Her management choices were further undermining her standing among her peers. "We should continue this discussion inside," Eleanor suggested, aware of curious eyes watching from the shadows. In Bartholomew's study, increasingly becoming her domain, Eleanor poured 2 glasses of brandy. The unprecedented offering of alcohol to an enslaved person symbolized the extraordinary transformation of their relationship. Daniel accepted the glass, but didn't drink immediately, watching her with cautious eyes. "Collins is right about one thing," Eleanor said, sinking into the leather chair behind the desk. "James will try to use tonight's events against me. He'll claim I can't control the plantation, that I'm allowing dangerous ideas to spread. And what will you tell him?" Eleanor took a sip of brandy, welcoming its warmth. "That Oakmont's productivity has increased 15% since I implemented your recommendations. That expenses have decreased by reducing waste. That I've secured extension of our loans." She set her glass down firmly. "I'll speak the language he respects. Profit." Daniel finally tasted the brandy, his eyes never leaving hers. "And if profit isn't enough? Then I'll remind him that while Bartholomew left him some shares in the business, I am the majority owner according to the will. His options are to cooperate or to challenge me in court, a lengthy, expensive process with no guaranteed outcome." Daniel's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. Men like James Hargrove don't easily accept a woman's authority, especially when she's changing things they consider natural law. Eleanor knew he was right. The changes at Oakmont, subtle though they might seem to her, represented dangerous disruption to the carefully balanced power structure of plantation society. Allowing enslaved people slightly more dignity, slightly more autonomy, slightly more humanity, was perceived as the first step toward complete upheaval of the system. "There's something you should know," Daniel said after a long pause. "Something that may happen soon." Eleanor tensed, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Isaiah isn't just planning for himself," Daniel continued cautiously. "There's a larger escape being organized, multiple plantations, dozens of people." Eleanor's breath caught. "When?" "Within the month, before harvest reaches its peak." The implications were staggering. A mass escape would trigger unprecedented response from authorities, posing enormous danger to everyone involved, both those fleeing and those left behind who might be suspected of assisting. "Do you support this plan?" Eleanor asked directly. Daniel met her gaze unflinchingly. "I believe in freedom, Mrs. Hargrove." It was not a direct answer, yet it told her everything. The money under the floorboards, his careful management of information, his protected position as overseer, all served larger purposes beyond his personal survival. "If they're caught, they'll be killed or worse," Daniel finished for her. "I know." Eleanor rose and walked to the window, looking out at her property, the land, buildings and people she legally owned, but was beginning to see through new eyes. Everything she had been raised to accept as natural, as God's design for the world, had been slowly unraveling since Bartholomew's death. "James arrives in 2 weeks," she said finally, turning back to face Daniel. "The escape should happen after." Daniel's expression registered surprise. "You want them to delay?" "I want them to succeed," Eleanor clarified. "James will bring increased scrutiny, probably additional men, allegedly for his protection, but really to watch the plantation. Timing is critical." Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. She wasn't opposing the escape, she was strategizing for its success. "I'll convey the concern," he said carefully, "but the decision isn't mine alone." Eleanor nodded. The existence of a network of organization among enslaved people across plantations was something plantation owners denied was possible. Yet she was now confronting its reality through the man standing before her. "Daniel," she said suddenly, "if there was a way to change things here, truly change them, would you stay?" The question clearly caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" Hypothetically," Eleanor continued, choosing her words with extreme care, "if there were legal means to transform Oakmont, to create something different, would you help build it rather than flee from it?" Daniel studied her with an intensity that might have been considered insolent in any other context. "Depends on what something different means." "I don't know yet," Eleanor admitted, "but I'm beginning to see possibilities I never considered before." Before their conversation could continue, a frantic knocking interrupted them. Martha burst in without waiting for permission, an unprecedented breach of protocol that signaled emergency. "Miss Eleanor, come quick, it's Micah. His wound's bleeding again and he's burning with fever." The moment broken, Eleanor and Daniel rushed to the infirmary, where the boy lay delirious, his amputation site angry and inflamed. The next hours were consumed with crisis as they fought to save his life once more, sending for the doctor and applying what remedies they knew. It was nearly dawn when Micah's fever finally broke. Eleanor, exhausted, found herself sitting beside Daniel on the infirmary steps as the first light appeared on the horizon. Their shoulders nearly touched, another small transgression in a growing list of boundaries crossed. "He'll live," Daniel said quietly. Eleanor nodded, too tired for words. Around them, Oakmont was stirring to life as another day began in a world that appeared unchanged, but was shifting beneath their feet with every passing hour. In the distance, a lone figure slipped from the slave quarters toward the fields. Isaiah, continuing his covert preparations despite the increased vigilance. The gears of change were in motion, for better or worse. In 2 weeks, James Hargrove would arrive, bringing with him all the force of tradition and authority to crush whatever transformation had begun at Oakmont. Eleanor glanced at Daniel beside her. This man who existed in the impossible space between enslaved and free, between trusted and suspect, between ally and property. Whatever came next would depend greatly on the fragile trust forming between them. A trust that defied everything she had been taught to believe about the natural order of her world. "We should prepare for James," she said finally, rising to her feet. "He'll try to destroy everything we've started here." Daniel stood as well, his expression resolute. "Then we'll need to be ready." The sun crested the horizon, bathing Oakmont in golden light that belied the gathering storm. In the coming days, their unlikely alliance would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine, and the consequences would echo far beyond the boundaries of the plantation. James Hargrove arrived on a Tuesday, bringing with him exactly what Eleanor had predicted. 2 business associates with interest in purchasing land, his personal secretary, and 4 hired men, whose rough appearance suggested purposes beyond simple protection. The entire entourage descended on Oakmont like an occupying force, filling the main house with masculine voices and tobacco smoke. Eleanor received them in the formal parlor, dressed immaculately in a deep blue gown that, while still observing mourning customs, suggested she was transitioning toward normal life. The subtle message was clear. She was not a helpless widow drowning in grief, but a composed businesswoman ready to defend her interests. "Eleanor, my dear," James greeted her with the excessive courtesy that barely masked his condescension. "You look well, considering the circumstances." At 45, James Hargrove embodied the successful Southern businessman, well-fed, impeccably dressed, and absolutely certain of his place in the world. "How kind of you to notice, James," Eleanor replied with practiced pleasantness. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Tolerable, though the roads near your eastern boundary are in shameful condition." He gestured to the men behind him. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Daniels. They've expressed interest in some of Bartholomew's, forgive me, your outlying acreage." Eleanor inclined her head politely toward the visitors. "Gentlemen, I look forward to discussing business, though I should mention I've had recent inquiries from the Savannah Cotton Exchange regarding those same parcels." It was a calculated lie, but it had the desired effect. Both men straightened with renewed interest, recognizing that competition might drive up the price of any potential sale. James frowned slightly. "You've been entertaining business offers?" "Alone. Bartholomew left comprehensive records," Eleanor explained smoothly, "and I've had excellent assistance from the plantation overseer in understanding operational matters." "Ah, yes, the slave manager," James said with undisguised distaste. "Bartholomew's peculiar experiment. I had hoped you'd have rectified that arrangement by now." Eleanor maintained her pleasant expression. "Daniel has proven invaluable during the transition. Productivity has actually increased under the current management structure." "Has it indeed?" James exchanged meaningful glances with his associates. "Well, we have much to discuss about Oakmont's future, perhaps after we've refreshed ourselves from the journey." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "Martha will show you to your rooms. Dinner will be served at 7. As the men left to settle in, Eleanor remained in the parlor, mentally preparing for the battles ahead. The first test came sooner than expected when James returned alone 30 minutes later, closing the parlor door behind him. "Eleanor, I'll speak frankly," he began without preamble. "Your situation here is untenable. A woman alone cannot manage an operation of this size, particularly not in these unstable times." "Unstable?" Eleanor inquired innocently. James's expression darkened. "Don't play naive. Slave uprisings in Virginia last year, increased Underground Railroad activity, abolitionists getting bolder with their rhetoric." He paced before the fireplace. "Add to that falling cotton prices and Bartholomew's debts, which I've taken the liberty of investigating myself." "How considerate of you," Eleanor remarked, her tone cooling noticeably. "My point," James continued, ignoring her sarcasm, "is that you need protection and guidance. The neighboring plantations are already talking about your unorthodox management choices." "My management choices have reduced expenses by 20% while increasing yield projections for the harvest," Eleanor countered. "Hardly cause for concern." James stopped pacing to stare at her directly. "You've reduced work hours, allowed the slave children additional meal breaks, reassigned duties based on some notion of aptitude rather than tradition." His voice dripped with disapproval. "Collins told me about the search last week. No runaways found, but he noted concerning changes in discipline and order." "Mr. Collins should concern himself with his own affairs," Eleanor replied sharply. "Particularly his inability to prevent escapes from his own property." James slammed his hand against the mantelpiece, his composure cracking. This is exactly what I feared. You don't understand the delicate balance we maintain in our society. Give these creatures an inch of leniency and they'll take everything. They aren't like us, Eleanor. They require firm governance. They require management that maximizes their productivity, Eleanor corrected, rising to her feet to meet his gaze more directly. Which is precisely what I'm providing. With the help of a slave who's clearly manipulating you, James sneered. Do you think I don't see what's happening? This Daniel has recognized your vulnerability and is using it to advance whatever agenda he and his kind harbor. Eleanor felt a flush of anger, but controlled it carefully. I find your assessment both incorrect and offensive, James. Daniel serves at my direction, not the reverse. We'll see, James said ominously. I've brought Mr. Peterson specifically to evaluate your workforce. He's an experienced slave dealer from Charleston. He'll make recommendations about which individuals should be sold to address the debt situation. Sold, Eleanor echoed, genuine shock breaking through her composed facade. Absolutely not. Oakmont's people are essential to its operation. Selling them would be counterproductive. Sentiment has no place in business, Eleanor, James chided. The most humane course is to secure Oakmont's future by making necessary adjustments. Some of the older individuals, the children, those with specialized skills who fetch premium prices but aren't essential to cotton production, all reasonable candidates for sale. Eleanor struggled to maintain her outward calm while inwardly recoiling at his cold calculation. The specialized skills category would certainly include Daniel, whose literacy and management abilities would command a high price from buyers looking for domestic servants or skilled workers. I appreciate your concern, James, she said finally, her voice tight, but as the majority owner of Oakmont, those decisions remain mine alone. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. For now, perhaps. But I've already consulted with Judge Pemberton about the possibility of establishing male guardianship over Bartholomew's estate, given the complexity of the holdings and your inexperience. The threat was unmistakable. While uncommon, courts occasionally appointed male relatives to oversee estates left to widows, particularly when substantial business interests were involved. The practice effectively stripped women of their inheritance rights under the guise of protection. That would be an extraordinary step, Eleanor observed, fighting to keep her voice steady, one that would require significant legal justification. Indeed, James agreed pleasantly, which is why the next few weeks will be so important. I'll be evaluating the plantation's condition, its management, and its prospects quite thoroughly. He moved toward the door, then paused. I suggest you reconsider your position on Mr. Peterson's evaluation. Voluntary cooperation would reflect well on your judgment. After he left, Eleanor remained motionless, absorbing the full implications of the threat. James wasn't simply interfering. He was systematically building a case to take legal control of Oakmont. Each deviation from traditional plantation management that she and Daniel had implemented could be presented as evidence of her incompetence. That evening, dinner was an exercise in careful navigation. Eleanor presided over the table with perfect Southern hospitality, deflecting probing questions from James's associates while presenting Oakmont's business prospects in the most favorable light. The irrigation improvements Daniel implemented last month should increase yield by at least 10%, she noted, as servants cleared the main course. We've documented the results in the western fields already. Fascinating that you rely so heavily on a slave's innovations, Mr. Whitmore commented with barely veiled condescension. Most unusual. Oakmont has always valued results over convention, Eleanor replied smoothly. Bartholomew established that tradition long before my arrival. James snorted. My brother's eccentricities were tolerated because of his position and wealth. Different standards apply to a widow managing alone. The implied threat hung over the table until Mr. Daniels awkwardly changed the subject to cotton futures, launching a discussion that carried them through dessert. Eleanor excused herself at the earliest opportunity, retreating to her chambers with instructions that she not be disturbed until morning. Once alone, she changed quickly into a simple dress and slipped through the servants' staircase to the kitchen. Martha looked up in surprise as Eleanor entered. "Miss Eleanor, is something wrong?" "I need to speak with Daniel," Eleanor said quietly. "Immediately. Can you arrange it without drawing attention?" Martha's expression revealed nothing, but she nodded. "He's checking the tobacco drying shed tonight. I'll send word." 30 minutes later, Eleanor made her way through the darkness toward the small structure on the eastern edge of the property. Daniel was waiting inside, a single lantern casting long shadows across the hanging tobacco leaves. "This is dangerous," he said without preamble as she entered. "James has men watching the quarters. They followed Isaiah to the creek earlier. They're building a case against me," Eleanor explained quickly, relating her conversation with James. "He intends to have me declared incompetent to manage Bartholomew's estate. He's brought a slave trader to evaluate everyone for potential sale." Daniel absorbed this with grim resignation. Not unexpected. "He specifically mentioned selling those with specialized skills," Eleanor continued. "He'll target you first, Daniel. Your position, your knowledge, your influence with the others all threaten him. My value on the market threatens him too," Daniel added pragmatically. "An educated overseer would fetch at least $1,500 in Charleston or New Orleans." The coldly practical assessment of his own worth as property struck Eleanor forcefully. Despite their increasingly equal conversations, the fundamental reality of their positions remained. She could be stripped of her authority, but he could be stripped of everything: identity, family, even his physical presence at Oakmont. "We need to accelerate our plans," she said decisively. "How soon can Isaiah and the others be ready?" Daniel shook his head. "Too risky now. James's men are already watching. The search at Collins's place has everyone on alert. Then we need another approach." Eleanor paced the small confines of the shed. "James expects me to resist selling any of Oakmont's people. What if I surprise him by agreeing, with conditions?" Daniel looked skeptical. "What conditions could possibly help?" "I select who's sold," Eleanor explained, thinking rapidly. "I insist on handling the transactions personally rather than through an agent. I negotiate directly with buyers I choose." Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. "You could control where people go." "Exactly. Select sympathetic buyers, perhaps even arrange deals." She hesitated, then continued more softly. "Arrange certain escapes after the sales are recorded, but before delivery." The audacity of the suggestion hung in the tobacco-scented air between them. What Eleanor was proposing wasn't simply unorthodox management. It was illegal on multiple levels, potentially treasonous under Southern law. "It's too dangerous," Daniel finally said. "For you especially. If James or anyone suspected—" "James already suspects me of incompetence and poor judgment," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm simply proposing to use those expectations against him." Daniel studied her with an intensity that would have been considered insolent in any other context. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why what? Why risk everything? Your position, your safety, your future?" His voice dropped lower. 3 months ago, you were Bartholomew Hargrove's proper wife, accepting everything about this plantation without question." Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I was blind," she finally said, "or willfully ignorant, accepting what I was taught without examining it. Bartholomew's death forced me to see, to understand, to take responsibility. Many widows simply remarry and continue exactly as before," Daniel pointed out. "I'm not many widows," Eleanor replied with unexpected fierceness, "and I've seen too much now to unsee it." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp whistle from outside, Martha's warning signal. Moments later, they heard voices approaching, men talking loudly as they moved between buildings. "James is watchers," Daniel whispered. "You need to leave." "How?" Eleanor hissed back. "They'll see me." Daniel quickly assessed their options. The north window. It opens onto the cotton storage area. Follow the path between the bales to the wash house, then circle back as if you were checking on laundry. And you? I'm the overseer. I have reason to be checking buildings at night. Eleanor nodded and moved toward the window, then paused and turned back. Daniel, whatever happens with James and his plans, I won't let them sell you. I promise. Their eyes met in the lantern light. A promise between equals despite the vast legal and social chasm that separated them. Then Eleanor slipped through the window just as the voices reached the shed door. The following days established a tense pattern. James and his associates roamed Oakmont freely, inspecting operations, questioning workers, and making copious notes. Eleanor maintained her authority as best she could, but James undermined her at every turn, countermanding her instructions when she wasn't present, and scheduling meetings with her creditors without her knowledge. The situation in the quarters grew equally tense. Peterson, the slave dealer, conducted invasive examinations of several people, inspecting teeth, muscle tone, and overall health while making notations in a small book. His particular attention to the children sent waves of fear through the community. By the end of the first week, confrontation became inevitable. James presented his assessment at breakfast, sliding a document across the table to Eleanor with an air of triumph. As you can see, selling just 12 individuals would address the immediate debt concerns, he explained, his tone superficially reasonable. I've taken the liberty of marking the optimal candidates based on market value versus plantation contribution. Eleanor scanned the list, her stomach churning. Daniel's name appeared first, followed by several skilled workers, 2 adolescent girls, and Micah, despite his recent amputation. Micah? A one-armed child recovering from surgery? She questioned, unable to hide her disgust. What possible market value does he represent? The Caribbean market has different standards, Peterson interjected from his place at the table. Labor is disposable there. They buy in volume. The casual cruelty stunned Eleanor into momentary silence. James interpreted her shock as defeat and pressed his advantage. I've already arranged transport to Savannah next week. Peterson will handle the auction details. The proceeds should clear nearly 70% of Bartholomew's outstanding debts. No, Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. James blinked in surprise. I beg your pardon? I said no, James. This list is unacceptable. Eleanor placed the paper down deliberately. If sales are necessary, and I'm not yet convinced they are, I will determine who is sold to whom and under what conditions. James's face flushed with anger. This is precisely the emotional, irrational approach I feared. Peterson is an expert. His selections maximize financial return while minimizing operational impact. His selections, Eleanor countered coldly, maximize your control over Oakmont by removing those most loyal to the current management structure, particularly Daniel. I'm not blind to your strategy, James. The pretense of familial cooperation shattered. James leaned forward, his expression hardening. You need to understand your position, Eleanor. Judge Pemberton has already expressed concern about your fitness to manage Bartholomew's estate. One petition, with sufficient evidence of mismanagement and male guardianship, will be established. Then you should also understand your position, Eleanor replied with equal steel. Oakmont's productivity has increased under my management. The loan extensions I've secured buy time until harvest. Any disruption you cause now will only damage the plantation's prospects and your own investment as a minority shareholder. She stood, signaling the end of the discussion. I will consider appropriate sales if absolutely necessary, but they will happen on my terms, or not at all. Until then, I expect your cooperation in maintaining Oakmont's operations as they currently stand. Without waiting for a response, Eleanor left the dining room, her heart pounding but her exterior calm. The confrontation had been inevitable, but its timing was strategic. She needed James to believe she was willing to consider sales, just not his selections. That afternoon, as Eleanor reviewed accounts in Bartholomew's study, a commotion erupted from the direction of the fields. She rushed to the window to see one of James's men dragging Isaiah toward the main house, the enslaved man's face bloodied and his hands bound behind him. Daniel appeared from the direction of the cotton gin, intercepting them in the yard. Though Eleanor couldn't hear the exchange, the tense body language suggested argument. James emerged from the stables, quickly joining the confrontation and gesturing emphatically toward the whipping post, a grim fixture that had stood unused since Bartholomew's death. Eleanor hurried outside, forcing herself to maintain a dignified pace rather than running. As she approached, she caught James's words. "Attempted escape. The punishment is clear and necessary, 20 lashes, minimum." "What's happening?" Eleanor demanded as she reached the group. James turned to her with barely concealed triumph. "This slave was caught with a map and detailed instructions for reaching the Ohio River. Clear evidence of escape planning. Peterson discovered it hidden in his quarters during the inventory assessment." Isaiah stood silently, blood dripping from his split lip, but his eyes defiant. Daniel remained beside him, his posture rigid with suppressed tension. "I see," Eleanor said, keeping her voice level despite the crisis unfolding before her. "And you've taken it upon yourself to determine punishment on my plantation, James?" "Standard discipline must be maintained," James insisted. "The others need to witness the consequences of such behavior. Peterson, prepare the post." "Stop," Eleanor commanded with such unexpected authority that everyone froze. "Isaiah is my property, not yours. His discipline is my decision, not yours." James's face contorted with frustration. "This weakness is exactly why—" "Strength takes many forms," Eleanor interrupted. "Daniel, take Isaiah to the storage barn. Lock him in. Post a guard." She turned to James. "We will discuss appropriate consequences privately. This is not a public spectacle." For a moment, rebellion flashed in James's eyes, but with witnesses present, including his business associates, who had emerged from the house at the commotion, directly defying the plantation's legal owner would overstep even his questionable authority. "This is a mistake," he said through clenched teeth. "Perhaps," Eleanor conceded, "but it is mine to make." As Daniel led Isaiah away, Eleanor caught a glimpse of something unexpected in the bound man's expression, not just relief at avoiding the whip, but confusion and reassessment as he looked at her. The moment passed quickly, but it registered in Eleanor's mind as significant. Perceptions were shifting, not just in her view of Oakmont's people, but in their view of her. Later that evening, Eleanor sat alone in Bartholomew's study, a glass of brandy untouched before her as she contemplated the precipice on which she stood. James would not forgive today's public challenge to his authority. His next move would be decisive, likely an immediate petition to the court for guardianship on grounds of her sentimental approach to slave discipline. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered, her face grave. "Daniel asks permission to speak with you, ma'am. Says it's urgent." Eleanor nodded. "Send him in." Daniel entered moments later, closing the door carefully behind him. His expression confirmed her worst fears before he spoke. "It's happening," he said simply. "Tonight." "The escape? But we agreed to delay." "Isaiah's discovery forced their hand," Daniel explained. "The others believe it's now or never. With James here, with Peterson documenting everyone for sale, they won't wait." Eleanor felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon her. "How many?" 17, Daniel answered quietly. "From Oakmont Collins Place and the Mercer Plantation. They're meeting at Blackwater Creek at midnight." The number stunned her. 17 people seeking freedom. The largest coordinated escape attempt in the county's history. If successful, it would devastate the affected plantations economically. If failed, the consequences would be brutal beyond imagination. "James has men watching the quarters," Eleanor said, thinking rapidly. "They'll notice 17 people missing. "There's a plan for that," Daniel assured her. "Only 6 from Oakmont are going. The others will rearrange sleeping positions to hide the absences until morning head count." A thought struck Eleanor suddenly. "Isaiah is locked in the storage barn." Daniel met her eyes directly. Yes, the implication was clear. Without access to Isaiah, the escape plan might unravel. Daniel was informing her of the situation, but he was also silently asking for her direct intervention, her active participation in what constituted a serious crime under Georgia law. "If they're caught, they'll be killed," Daniel finished bluntly. "They know the risk. They've chosen to take it." Eleanor rose and moved to the window, staring out at the plantation that had defined her adult life, first as Bartholomew's wife, now as its reluctant owner. Everything she'd been raised to believe told her to alert James, to stop the escape, to maintain the system that provided her privilege and comfort. Yet everything she had come to understand in recent months pushed her toward a different choice, a terrifying step into unknown territory from which there could be no return. "The storage barn key is in the top drawer of this desk," she said finally, her back still turned to Daniel. "I'll be checking the infirmary at 11 o'clock. I expect to be there for at least an hour, tending to Micah's recovery." She heard the drawer open, then close. When she turned back, Daniel stood watching her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher, respect mingled with something deeper, more complex. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "Are you going with them?" The question hung between them, fraught with implications neither had dared verbalize until this moment. "My role is different," Daniel replied carefully. "I stay to help others leave." "Like a conductor on the railroad," Eleanor said, understanding dawning. Daniel nodded once. "Something like that." For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence, both recognizing that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Whatever happened after tonight, nothing at Oakmont would ever be the same again. "Be careful," Eleanor finally said. "James will look for someone to blame when he discovers they're gone." Daniel's eyes held hers with unexpected warmth. "So will you." Without another word, he slipped from the study, leaving Eleanor alone with the monumental consequences of the choice she had just made. A choice that defied her upbringing, her social position, and the very laws of her society. Outside, darkness fell over Oakmont Plantation as the evening transformed into night. In the slave quarters, 17 souls prepared for a desperate bid for freedom. In the main house, James Hargrove plotted his takeover of his brother's estate, unaware that events were already unfolding that would shatter his plans. And in the space between these worlds, Eleanor Hargrove and Daniel Walker had formed an alliance that defied classification, a partnership based on shared humanity rather than the artificial hierarchies that had previously defined their existence. The storm was breaking. By morning, nothing would remain unchanged. Dawn broke over Oakmont with deceptive serenity. Mist clung to the cotton fields, gilded by early sunlight, creating an ethereal landscape that belied the chaos about to erupt. Eleanor had barely slept, alternating between anxious pacing and sitting rigidly by her window, straining to hear any commotion that might signal discovery of the escape. None came during the night. She dressed carefully, selecting a severe black dress that reinforced her status as the plantation's mistress, and made her way downstairs with deliberate calm. In the dining room, she found James and his associates already at breakfast, discussing timber prices as if it were any ordinary morning. "Eleanor," James acknowledged her with a nod. "We were just discussing the southeastern acreage. Whitmore believes it has excellent potential for lumber harvesting before any agricultural development." "How interesting," Eleanor replied, accepting coffee from Martha with a murmured thanks. "Though I believe we should focus on our existing operations before expanding into new ventures." The conversation continued with superficial pleasantness, giving no indication that anything was amiss. Eleanor maintained her composure while inwardly counting the minutes until the inevitable discovery. It came just as they were finishing breakfast. Peterson burst into the dining room, his face flushed with agitation. "Mr. Hargrove, 6 slaves are missing from the quarters. The overseer claims they must have fled during the night." James's head snapped up, his expression darkening. "Which 6? "Isaiah, who was supposedly locked in the storage barn, plus 3 field hands, the blacksmith's assistant, and one of the house girls," Peterson reported. James slammed his fist on the table, rattling the china. "I knew it! This is the direct result of your leniency," he snarled at Eleanor. "Where is Daniel? He must have known. He must have helped them." "I believe he's organizing search parties as his standard procedure," Eleanor replied with remarkable steadiness. "Perhaps you should join them, James, given your concern." Within the hour, Oakmont had transformed into a hive of frantic activity. James dispatched riders to neighboring plantations, discovering that Collins had lost 4 people and Mercer 7, confirming the coordinated nature of the escape. Sheriff Talbot arrived with deputies and tracking dogs, while armed men gathered in the main yard, prepared to hunt down the fugitives. Daniel organized Oakmont's remaining enslaved men into search parties, strategically sending them in directions he knew the escapees had not taken. Eleanor watched from the porch as James pulled him aside for intense questioning, Daniel's face remaining impassive, despite what must have been threatening interrogation. By midday, the first search parties returned empty-handed. The dogs had lost the scent at Blackwater Creek, suggesting the fugitives had entered the water to hide their trail. A common tactic, but one that significantly reduced their chances of survival in the swampy wilderness. "They can't have gotten far," James insisted, as the search leaders gathered for consultation. 17 of them traveling together? Impossible to move quickly or quietly. "Unless they separated," Sheriff Talbot suggested. "Different routes improve chances for some, even if others are caught." The possibility ignited fresh urgency in the search. Additional parties were organized, covering wider territory with instructions to alert neighboring counties. James appeared increasingly agitated as the day progressed without results, his anger focusing increasingly on Eleanor and Daniel. "This happened on your watch," he accused Eleanor when they were momentarily alone in the study. "Your softness, your misplaced sympathy, your refusal to maintain proper discipline, all led directly to this disaster. Escapes happened under Bartholomew's management as well," Eleanor pointed out, "despite his harsh methods." "Not 17 at once," James exploded. "This was organized, planned, aided." His eyes narrowed. "I want Daniel locked up until we determine his involvement." "On what grounds?" Eleanor challenged. "He's actively leading search parties." "Leading them away from the escapees, more likely," James countered. "Don't be naive, Eleanor. He's one of them. His loyalty could never truly be to Oakmont or to you." The assertion stung more than Eleanor expected, touching on doubts she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. Daniel's position had always been precarious. Trusted by Bartholomew, yet never free, given authority over others, yet still legally property. Where did his true loyalty lie? With the plantation that had elevated his position, but kept him enslaved. With Eleanor, who had begun treating him as a partner rather than a possession, or with those who sought freedom at any cost. "Daniel remains essential to Oakmont's operations," she stated firmly, "especially now, with 6 workers missing. I won't disrupt the plantation further based on your suspicions." James studied her with growing comprehension. "You've changed, Eleanor. There's something different in you." His voice lowered ominously. "What exactly has transpired between you and this slave?" The implication, with its ugly undercurrent of sexual impropriety, was designed to shock and intimidate her. Instead, it hardened Eleanor's resolve. "What has transpired," she replied coldly, "is that I've learned to see value in people beyond the limitations imposed by society or law. Daniel's intelligence and management skills have benefited Oakmont tremendously. I'd be a fool to discard such an asset based on prejudice." "Asset?" James repeated incredulously. You speak of him as if he were a business partner rather than property. This is precisely the derangement that concerns me, and will concern Judge Pemberton when I present my petition tomorrow. Tomorrow? Eleanor echoed, momentarily thrown off balance. James smiled thinly. Yes, dear sister-in-law. I had planned to wait another week, but today's events have forced my hand. I'll be riding to Savannah first thing in the morning to file for emergency guardianship of Bartholomew's estate, citing your evident mental instability and the plantation's descent into chaos under your management. The threat was no longer veiled. James intended to legally strip Eleanor of her authority, possibly even her freedom, if he successfully argued that her mental condition required supervision. Under such guardianship, he would control Oakmont completely, its lands, its operations, and its people. You won't succeed, Eleanor said, fighting to maintain her composure. I have documentation of Oakmont's improved productivity. The bank has extended our loans based on my management plan. 17 escaped slaves will overshadow any marginal productivity improvements, James countered smugly. No court in Georgia will entrust a plantation to a woman who can't control her property, particularly when evidence suggests inappropriate relations with that property. He left her then, confident in his impending victory. Eleanor remained in the study, mind racing as she calculated her rapidly diminishing options. By this time tomorrow, James could return with legal authority to take control of everything. The improvements she and Daniel had implemented would be reversed. Those who had remained at Oakmont would suffer under renewed harsh conditions, and Daniel would be sold. James had made that intention clear from the beginning. If he gained guardianship, Daniel would be sent to the auction block immediately, probably to the brutal Caribbean plantations where his education and management experience would be irrelevant, where only his physical labor would matter until it broke him. As evening approached, the search parties returned one by one, exhausted and empty-handed. The dogs had lost all traces of the fugitive's scent. Sheriff Talbot reluctantly admitted that the escapees had likely reached the network of swamps and waterways that could eventually lead them north toward free territory. We'll circulate descriptions to all counties between here and the Ohio River, he promised James. Bounty hunters will be watching every known crossing point. Someone will spot them eventually. James was not consoled. I want continued searches at first light, he insisted. Double the bounty on each of them. Triple it for Isaiah. He's clearly the ringleader. Ndul. Under ordinary circumstances, Eleanor would have been responsible for offering dinner and accommodations to the sheriff and search party leaders. Instead, she retreated to her chambers, claiming a headache while Martha coordinated the household arrangements. Alone in her room, Eleanor opened her writing desk and began composing letters to her banker, to her attorney, to the few social connections she maintained from her Charleston upbringing. A soft knock at her door interrupted her writing. Martha entered with a tray of food and a concerned expression. You should eat something, Miss Eleanor, the older woman urged. It's been a long day. Eleanor managed a weak smile. Thank you, Martha. I know it's been difficult for everyone. Martha hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone. Daniel asks if you could meet him at the old spring house. Says it's important. Says to be careful not to be seen. The request sent a jolt of alarm through Eleanor. Such a meeting carried enormous risk, especially with James watching for any evidence to support his accusations. Yet if Daniel felt it necessary— When? She asked. Midnight, Martha whispered. He'll leave the back lantern lit. Eleanor nodded. Thank you, Martha, for everything. The older woman's eyes softened with unexpected warmth. You're not what we expected, Miss Eleanor. Not what we expected at all. She slipped from the room before Eleanor could respond to the cryptic comment. The hours until midnight crawled by with excruciating slowness. Eleanor changed from her formal dress into a simpler dark gown, better suited for moving undetected through the night. She plaited her hair tightly and wrapped a dark shawl around her shoulders. At 11:45, she eased her door open and listened intently for any movement in the house. Hearing nothing, she made her way down the servants' staircase and through the kitchen to the rear door. Outside, the night was clear and star-filled, offering more illumination than she would have preferred for a clandestine meeting. She kept to the shadows of buildings, circling wide around the main yard where several of James's men still maintained a watchful presence. The old spring house stood a quarter-mile from the main buildings, partially hidden in a grove of live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Its stone walls housed the natural spring that had first attracted settlers to this land, providing cool water storage in summer and protection from freezing in winter. Bartholomew had built a newer, larger spring house closer to the main house years ago, leaving this one largely abandoned, except for occasional use during harvest when extra storage was needed. As promised, a single lantern glowed dimly through the cracks in the wooden door. Eleanor approached cautiously, listening for any indication of a trap. Hearing nothing suspicious, she knocked softly in the pattern Daniel had taught her. 2 quick taps, followed by 1. The door opened immediately. Daniel ushered her inside, closing and barring the door behind her. The interior was cool and damp, smelling of earth and stone. Besides the lantern, the only furnishings were a wooden bench and several empty storage barrels. "I apologize for the risk," Daniel said without preamble, "but circumstances have changed dramatically. James is filing for guardianship tomorrow," Eleanor confirmed. "He plans to leave for Savannah at first light." Daniel's expression remained grave. "That's only part of it. The search parties discovered something unexpected in the northwest section. Not escapees, but evidence of something else." Eleanor tensed. "What evidence?" "An encampment, recently used. Signs of multiple people having stayed there for several days." He paused significantly. "White people, northerners, based on items they left behind." "Abolitionists," Eleanor breathed, comprehending the implications immediately. Daniel nodded. "Sheriff Talbot believes they're connected to the Underground Railroad, guides who helped coordinate the escape. He's convinced there's a local collaborator providing information, shelter, supplies, and James suspects you," Eleanor concluded. "James suspects both of us," Daniel corrected quietly. "One of his men has been questioning house servants about our meetings. Martha overheard him offering rewards for information about our conversations, our behavior toward each other." The danger of their situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. Suspicion of abolitionist collaboration was one of the most serious accusations possible in Georgia. Property loss could be dismissed as mismanagement. Sympathy toward enslaved people could be attributed to feminine sentiment. But active assistance to Underground Railroad operatives constituted treason against the Southern way of life, a crime that could result in imprisonment or worse. "We need to act immediately," Eleanor said, her mind racing, "before James returns with legal authority." "I agree," Daniel replied, "which is why I've made arrangements." Something in his tone caught Eleanor's attention. "What arrangements?" Daniel met her gaze directly. "A carriage will arrive at the north property line at 3 o'clock. It will take you to Savannah, where a ship leaves for Philadelphia at noon tomorrow." Eleanor stared at him in shock. "Me? You're arranging for me to flee?" "It's your only safe option now," Daniel insisted. "James has enough circumstantial evidence to convince a sympathetic judge. Once he has guardianship, your freedom will be severely restricted. He'll likely claim your mental state requires treatment. Confinement in an asylum is not uncommon for women who challenge patriarchal authority too directly." The scenario was horrifyingly plausible. Eleanor had heard whispered stories of inconvenient wives or sisters committed to asylums for behavior deemed inappropriate or challenging to male authority. As a widow defying her brother-in-law's expectations, she was particularly vulnerable to such tactics. "What about you?" she demanded. "What about everyone else at Oakmont?" Daniel's face softened slightly. "I have my own arrangements. Different route, different timeline. You're planning to escape too," Eleanor realized. "After all this time helping others, you're finally going yourself." He nodded. Tonight's events accelerated the timeline. Once James takes control, my position becomes untenable. He'll sell me immediately, likely to the sugar plantations where few survive more than a few years. The starkness of his assessment hit Eleanor with physical force. The precarious protection she had offered him as Oakmont's mistress would vanish the moment James gained legal control. Daniel's exceptional abilities, his literacy, intelligence, management skills, would be deliberately wasted in the brutal environment of the Caribbean plantations, a punishment designed to break both body and spirit. "But what about your role here?" she pressed. "You said you stayed to help others leave." "Others have already stepped into that role," Daniel explained. "The network continues with or without me, and my usefulness here is ending as scrutiny increases." Eleanor paced the small confines of the spring house, mind working frantically. "If we both flee, James wins. He'll take Oakmont, reverse everything we've accomplished, punish those who remain for our actions. If we stay, he still wins," Daniel countered pragmatically, "but with greater personal cost to us both." The truth of his statement was undeniable, yet something within Eleanor rebelled against surrender. There had to be another option, some path neither of them had considered. What if, she began slowly, an audacious idea forming. What if we changed the terms entirely? Daniel raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "James's petition depends on portraying me as incompetent or mentally unstable," Eleanor reasoned. "He needs to demonstrate that I'm unfit to manage Bartholomew's estate due to inappropriate behavior or poor judgment, which today's escape provides ample evidence for," Daniel noted. "In his eyes, yes," Eleanor agreed. "But what if we presented an alternative narrative? One that reframes everything we've done at Oakmont, not as mismanagement, but as deliberate strategic innovation?" Daniel looked skeptical. "What innovation justifies 17 people escaping at once?" "Not justifies," Eleanor corrected. "Renders irrelevant. What if Oakmont were no longer dependent on enslaved labor at all?" The audacity of the suggestion silenced Daniel momentarily. "You're proposing emancipation," Eleanor stated firmly. "Voluntary manumission of every person at Oakmont, effective immediately. Conversion to paid labor with contracts, housing and education provisions." Daniel stared at her as if she'd suggested flying to the moon. "That's impossible. The legal obstacles alone are significant but not insurmountable," Eleanor insisted. "Georgia law permits manumission under certain conditions. My attorney in Savannah has handled such cases before, rarely and usually for individual house servants, but the precedent exists." "The cost would be astronomical," Daniel argued. "You'd be voluntarily surrendering property valued at over $50,000. No court would allow it without declaring you insane, exactly what James is claiming." "Not if it's presented as a sound business strategy," Eleanor countered. "There are northern textile mills experimenting with paid labor systems. Some European agricultural operations have abandoned serfdom for contract farming with improved productivity. We document everything. The increased efficiency we've already achieved with reduced work hours and skill-based assignments, the potential for further improvements with education and incentives." She was speaking rapidly now, the plan forming as she articulated it. "We position Oakmont not as abandoning tradition, but as pioneering the future, a model that combines profitability with Christian principles of human dignity. We appeal to both economic interests and moral authority." Daniel's expression had transformed from skepticism to cautious consideration. Even if possible legally, the social consequences would be severe. No neighboring plantation would accept such a radical departure from the established order. You'd be ostracized, possibly threatened. "I'm already facing ostracism and threats," Eleanor pointed out. "At least this way, the sacrifice serves a greater purpose than mere escape." Daniel fell silent, weighing the proposal with the careful calculation that had helped him survive and thrive in a system designed to crush such independent thinking. Finally, he spoke. It would require immediate action, documents prepared and filed before James reaches Judge Pemberton, contracts drafted for every person remaining at Oakmont. Financial restructuring to account for wages instead of purchase and maintenance costs. "We can do it," Eleanor said with growing conviction. "My attorney, Mr. Blackwood, lives in Savannah but keeps a summer home just 20 miles from here. If we reach him tonight, he could prepare the necessary documents by morning. And the people of Oakmont, have you considered their wishes?" Daniel challenged. "Freedom with uncertain terms may seem less secure than the known conditions of enslavement to some. Many have family on other plantations they would be separated from." It was a fair question that brought Eleanor up short. In her determination to find a solution, she had once again fallen into the trap of deciding others' fates without their input, a subtler but still real form of the very control she sought to dismantle. "You're right," she acknowledged. "This can't be imposed from above, even with good intentions. There must be choice, consultation, genuine participation in the decision." There's no time for complete consensus," Daniel noted pragmatically, "not with James leaving at dawn." "Then we start with the necessary legal framework," Eleanor decided. "File the initial manumission documents to block James's petition, then develop the specifics collaboratively with everyone affected." She looked directly at Daniel. "Beginning with you." The statement hung between them, weighted with significance. Daniel had been central to Oakmont's operations for years, yet never with recognized authority or compensation. In the new system Eleanor proposed, his position would need formal definition, no longer overseer of enslaved workers, but perhaps manager of free laborers, with corresponding status and payment. "If we do this," Daniel said carefully, "there's no turning back. We challenge not just James, but the entire foundation of Plantation society. The resistance will be fierce, possibly violent." "I know," Eleanor replied quietly, "but I can't go back to who I was before, someone who accepted injustice because it was comfortable and familiar. Can you?" Their eyes met in the lantern light, the question resonating beyond the immediate crisis to the fundamental transformation they had both undergone in recent months. Whatever their original positions, plantation mistress and enslaved overseer, they now stood at a crossroads where their choices would define not just their individual futures, but potentially create ripples far beyond Oakmont's boundaries. "No," Daniel answered finally. "I can't go back either." Decision made, they quickly formulated a plan. Daniel would ride immediately to Mr. Blackwood's summer residence, carrying Eleanor's signed authorization and a letter explaining their intentions. If the attorney agreed to help, he would prepare the necessary documents and bring them to Oakmont by mid-morning, before James could reach Judge Pemberton in Savannah. Meanwhile, Eleanor would return to the main house and gather the financial records needed to demonstrate Oakmont's viability under the new model. She would also draft initial contract templates based on northern examples Bartholomew had collected in his library, part of his peculiar interest in alternative economic systems, despite his conventional practices. "We should meet again at sunrise," Daniel suggested. "The old cotton warehouse would be safer than here, fewer people passing by at that hour." Eleanor nodded agreement. "Be careful. James's men are still patrolling." "I know every inch of this land," Daniel reminded her with a hint of a smile. "I've moved undetected when the stakes were even higher." As they prepared to leave the springhouse, Eleanor suddenly touched Daniel's arm, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "I want you to know that working with you has changed everything for me. My understanding of the world, of people, of myself." Daniel's expression softened in the lantern light. "For me as well," he replied simply. They slipped out into the night, separating immediately, Daniel heading toward the stables to secure a horse, Eleanor circling back toward the main house. As she moved through the shadows, Eleanor felt a strange sense of clarity, despite the enormous risk they were undertaking. For the first time since Bartholomew's death, perhaps for the first time in her life, she was choosing a path entirely her own, guided by principles she had discovered rather than inherited. The road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous. James would fight the manumission with every legal weapon at his disposal. Neighboring plantation owners would view Oakmont's transformation as a threat to their way of life. Economic challenges would emerge as they pioneered a system with few precedents in the agricultural South. Yet in the face of these obstacles, Eleanor felt something unexpected: hope. Not the passive hope that circumstances might improve, but the active hope that comes from committed work toward meaningful change. Whatever happened tomorrow, Oakmont would never return to what it had been, and neither would she. As dawn broke over Georgia the following day, two figures met in an abandoned cotton warehouse, a plantation mistress and a man she had once legally owned. Together they awaited the arrival of an attorney carrying documents that would upend their world and set in motion changes neither could fully predict. The future beckoned, uncertain but full of possibility. For the people of Oakmont Plantation, a new day was truly beginning.